She had to climb off the train unaided. She had to get onto a cart. She was covered with people with typhus and typhoid fever, and she proceeded to give birth to me. My mother's older sister, the lady wearing the yellow star, well, when she arrived in Auschwitz, none of the initial procedures took place. They were able to keep their luggage, they kept their clothes, they weren't tattooed, they weren't shaved. And they were sent to what was called a Familienlager, family lager, which was just families were together. It just meant one or two huts that were together. And there was just one very cynical reason why, and that was so that they could be forced to write postcards home as propaganda, right? And my aunt, that lady, she wrote this postcard to her cousin who still happened to be in Prague. This is the lady we lived with after the war. So this has her name, her date of birth, the 21st of March 1904, Birkenau, right? Now that lady's name was Olga. Where the word Olga should be is another word, is that word, Lechem, which is neither Czech nor German, because the postcards had to be written in German so the Germans could censor them. It is Hebrew, and the word Lechem means bread. And my aunt was telling her cousin they were starving. Her cousin understood, her cousin sent a parcel, but the contents of it would have been stolen long before it got anywhere near them. And I have to say that even before the postcard was sent from Auschwitz to Prague, they were all dead, all of them. My dears, I'm here with my husband, my sister and my nephew. All are well and in good health. My husband received a parcel yesterday from our housekeeper, and I would ask you to confirm this to her. Please also thank Gerdi. Could she greet Birza Schmidt for us? I hope you're well and happy. Your parents were very well at the time of our departure. Write soon. Peter looks well. Peter's my 8-year-old cousin. Peter looks well and looks forward to receiving news from you. Greetings and kisses, yours, Denna. Well, that sounds like having a wonderful time. Wish you were here. After Auschwitz, my mother was sent to a slave labour camp in Germany for 6 months, where she was working on the V1. And at the end of March, beginning of April, when the Germans were realising they were losing the war, they were evacuating the camps because they were trying to empty the camps of living witnesses as to what would be going on inside. And my mother, along with about 2,000 other prisoners, were on a train like this that consisted of open coal wagons, and during this 17-day nightmare of a journey, at the end of which they arrived in Mauthausen, and that is the shock of seeing the name Mauthausen provoked my mother going into labour. And she gave birth to me. She had to climb off the train unaided. She had to get onto a cart. She was covered with people with typhus and typhoid fever, and she proceeded to give birth to me. And that is when another German soldier saw what was happening and said to her, "Du kannst weiter schreien," which means you can carry on screaming. And she always said that she was screaming not only because she was in labour, but because she thought this was her very last minute on this earth. She thought she was about to die. But we both survived. And there are 3 reasons why we survived, and the first is a very chilling one. This is a picture of Mauthausen, or perhaps this would be better. The first, the very chilling reason why we survived, and that is because on the 28th of April 1945, the Germans had run out of gas for the gas chamber. Well, my birthday is 29th, and I was born at the gates of Mauthausen. This is a photograph of the main form of torture in Mauthausen was the fact that prisoners had to work all daylight hours in a stone quarry. and those are people. And so many of them died or were killed on those steps that the prisoners themselves nicknamed them the Stairway of Death. They are very steep. I've seen them and I've been on them as well. But this is liberation in Mauthausen, when the prisoners who were strong enough, they're pulling down the Nazi emblem, the eagle with the swastika underneath. My birth certificate is unique because of where I was born, in the Mauthausen concentration camp right at the very end of the war. And it actually reads, Das Kind, the child, Eva Nathan, born on the 29th of April 1945 at 20:30 hours in the evening. My father, architect Bernd Nathan, and then it says Israelitisch, which is another word of saying Jewish. My mother, Anna Geborene, which means maiden name, Kaudrova, again Israelitisch. But this birth certificate was only issued on the 14th of April 1948, which was 3 years after my birth. And the reason my mother had to apply to the town of Mauthausen for it was because we were about to leave, my mother, my stepfather and I, we were emigrating from Czechoslovakia to the UK, and she needed to have documentation for me. This is my stepfather, Karl Bergman, in his RAF uniform, and of course smoking a cigarette, which he always did. And this is my parents, my mother, my stepfather, and this was their wedding in Prague after the war. And then we left for England. This is in Cardiff.
It's your mother.
Yeah, and we were on our way to my first school prize giving, where my mother shed a lot of tears. Well, all parents and grandparents shed tears at prize givings, but I think she might have cried a bit more because, unknown to her, I was about to receive a prize for reading, and I hadn't spoken a word of English the year before. It was my mother's 85th birthday, and I said to her, "What would you like to do as a birthday treat?" And she said, "Well, everybody's going on this London Eye, I want to go." So we did. And then this is my mother 10 years later on her 95th birthday.
She looks good.
Yeah, she looked tremendous. And then this,
Where you get it from?
and this, these are my two sons many years ago. Well, she was still alive. And I always said, this is how I usually end my talks. And I say, my mother was always amazed that she'd survived her wartime experiences that I survived, and that she ended her life when she was 96 with 3 great-grandchildren. She was very sad about the tragedy, but not bitter. She didn't hate. As I said to you earlier, she wanted people brought to justice if it was appropriate. And she always said you should never blame anybody of a younger generation. You know, all of that. My grandfather Louis was the only one of my 4 grandparents to have survived the war. And the reason for that is because he was German. In the First World War, he was in the German army. In the First World War, he was given the Iron Cross. Yeah. And then in the Second World War, he's thrown into a concentration camp. Most of his family is killed. Wow. So, and I knew him. I met him. Yeah. But I met him as...
That's not you?
No, it's his grandson. Yeah. But I met him when I was a little girl, but he couldn't see me because he'd been blinded by the gas in the First World War. Oh, and he couldn't speak to me because he spoke German and Dutch and I only spoke Czech and English. But I would come in, I'd give him a kiss, I'd say, "Hello, grandfather," and he knew that I was the only surviving child in the family. So I recommend Born Survivors, which tells the story of 3 young mothers, all of whom arrived in Auschwitz pregnant, all of whom were in the Freiburg slave labour camp for 6 months, all of whom were on that horrendous train journey in coal trucks for 17 days, all of whom gave birth in the most dire of circumstances in April 45, and all 6 of us survived. All 3 mothers, all 3 babies, none of the fathers. And this is a fantastic book called Born Survivors by Wendy Holden, and it tells our story.